Why hello there, and welcome to another Wuthering Waves discussion video. I've got another pretty positive discussion video for you guys today. I'm pretty excited to get into it, so I hope you're doing well, and let's get right into the video. So you may or may not have already seen this. Crow Games, the developer of Wuthering Waves, it was yesterday for me, put out a dev blog or like an article basically going over like some issues that the game has been having, as well as like going over player feedback and sort of like directly responding to that. So I sort of wanted to briefly go over that, but I also wanted to have like a discussion about like the level of communication that we're seeing from this company and discuss like how that makes me feel and like what I think it means for the game and all that other stuff. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and look at this article. Now, real quick, before we jump in and start reading this article, I do want to say that like this is not the first bit of communication that we've seen from the developers. I've even talked about it in a previous video, but there was like some pretty direct communication at launch because, as you are possibly aware, the game had some pretty major issues at launch. Unfortunately, there were like some pretty big technical issues, some pretty big problems preventing people from playing the game properly. And especially in a game like this, where like combat is a huge part of the game, you really need smooth performance for like high intensity combat to like be a thing, you know, like you can't have lag in that kind of situation. But yeah, I did want to bring that up just to kind of mention that this isn't the first time that they've communicated with the player base directly about issues in the game. Yeah, it's a positive sign to see them like come back and provide even more communication, because like we are moving out of the launch part of the game and we're moving into sort of like the post-launch phase. And I know like we're still in the first patch, it's literally 1.0, but the thing about that is people are gonna burn through the content really fast because there's a lot of hype. And so like there's probably gonna be like 20 or 30 days or so of people just like chilling, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the next patch and stuff. And that's gonna give them so much time to like fiddle around with the game, to nitpick it, to find issues with it. This part of like moving from like launch to post-launch support is actually really critical, and so it's really good to see that they are like on it and they are literally already communicating and putting out stuff to talk to us. So I'm not going to go through like the whole article entirely because like there's like a bunch of small details in here and there's a lot of repetition, and like honestly you can read it yourself. I do want to go over kind of just like the highlights of it real quick though. Basically they, you know, start out by saying that like, hey, since the official launch of the game, we've received a lot of feedback and suggestions, and we are genuinely grateful for the attention and support. This is something that they've said a lot, and basically just iterating that like they appreciate the feedback, like they are listening. And obviously they are listening because like all of this stuff is stuff that I've heard people complain about in my community. So let's get into it. The very first thing that they wanted to like bring up and talk about is that like developing echoes and like farming echoes and stuff like that all feels like way too grindy, and that there's no real like storage system for like, there's like condensed resin and Genshin and stuff like that. So like if you cap out your energy and you want to store like 1 day worth of energy, like if you can't play that day or whatever, then you can do that. And that's really important because not everyone can play every day. Losing out on progression because you just weren't able to log in feels super bad, especially when it's like early game and we all need resources super bad. So this is sort of just like going over the fact that echoes are too grindy, as well as going over that there's no way to like store the like resin system thing, like the waveforms or whatever. Like there's no way to really like store that in game so far. And essentially they're basically just saying in this that like it's going to be cheaper to level up echoes, that echoes are going to be easier to farm, and that echo development materials are going to be easier to acquire. They also mentioned that there was like a bug with recycling echoes. Like I didn't really know this, but like if you go in and try to delete an echo that you've leveled up, you're supposed to get shell credits back. And I guess they've already fixed this issue or whatever, but it affected people, so we're getting like 1 million shell credits, which is pretty nice. And then the other highlight of this section that I want to mention before we move on to the next part of this is that they are giving us these like crystal solvents, and they're giving us 20 of them. One crystal solvent is 60 wave plates. So like the wave plates are what you use to like farm bosses or whatever. 60 of those is one boss. So that is literally 20 boss runs like for free that we will just get to do. The next thing is basically just some bug or some error in like a description of a 5-star weapon, and we're getting like 5 summons for that, which is pretty epic. And then they basically basically go in and they start talking about some event stuff where like they were essentially like responding to feedback about certain events that people were not satisfied with, as well as outlining like the update timeline for like future versions. And essentially as a compensation for like adjusting the timing of the patch, they are giving us like 10 free summons. So one thing I'm really seeing as like a common pattern with Kuro Games so far is that like every time we run into some issue with the game, they are willing to sort of say like, well, here's like appropriate compensation. Like they don't just hand out like 2 primo gems or like half of a wish or something. Like they actually are giving us compensation that feels like sometimes even more than what I would expect to get from them. So I think that that's really positive to see that they're actually willing to give us stuff to compensate for stuff like that. Like adjusting the patch, like I think they basically just extended the patch by like a little bit. I don't really know exactly what the difference is because I'm not like that tuned in or whatever, but yeah, it's pretty nice to see the 10 free summons. The next section is pretty interesting. It's talking about combat and control experience optimization. I've heard about people complaining about echoes, and I've heard about people complaining about like obviously the technical issues of the game not running properly. This is the other thing that I've heard a lot of complaints about are like the lock-on system, auto aiming, camera performance in the battle, bosses acting weird, aggroing really early, or like the boss is resetting if they hit the edge of the ring or whatever, key binding issues, all sorts of other stuff. And honestly, it's really good to hear that they are listening to all these complaints and that they're taking it very seriously, because like combat is sort of like the #1 thing that people are impressed with this game, and I think that they need to refine that as much as possible. So like all these issues with like cameras and stuff like that, like that's really important to fix, because like if people aren't able to track bosses properly, if they're not able to use the lock-on function properly, if it feels broken in some fundamental way, that's not good, because the boss fights are actually really good, and as long as all the systems work properly, they're really fun. So I'm just hoping that they're able to really hammer out this stuff and work on it. It's good to know that they're aware of it though. And then the rest of the stuff is essentially random stuff. Like they're gonna add purchase limits to like flowers so you don't accidentally spend all your show credits on flower. They are doing a couple things to like optimize and improve gameplay, crashes and stability, audio, sound effects. And honestly, audio and sound effects I think deserves a bit of a bigger mention here. Like they do mention that there's like missing sound effects, loud ambient sounds, but I feel like there have been actually a lot of issues in my play of the game with like voice lines cutting off or like playing improperly or out of order, and I feel like that deserves like a lot of focus, because like those things are really jarring and really like pull away from the immersion of the game. So I'm not sure if they do know about those things. I'm sure they probably do, but like they didn't seem to like directly address that right here, which does make me like a little unsure. But yeah, that's just one thing that I wanted to mention. All right, and so the last thing I want to mention before we move into a broad discussion is actually this little bit here right at the end. I'm just going to read it. Since Wuthering Waves' official global launch, we have been disheartened by our inability to provide a high quality gaming experience to all rovers. We understand that continuously releasing better versions and content is our goal and mission, and we will always strive to uphold that. Finally, we sincerely thank all rovers for your continuous attention and unwavering support. To me, that basically reads as the developers saying like, we kind of expected this to go better and we're really, really disheartened to see that it didn't go so well. I get that. Like, yeah, I was definitely expecting to have a smoother launch. If not expecting, just hoping to have a smoother launch. At this point, it's sort of one of those like, it is what it is kind of things. I do think that it's good to see that they care and that they noticed that things have not been going great, and they're not just sort of like shrugging it off. Like they are going to probably take this very seriously. And this might have been like sort of like a kick in the butt for them to realize that like, hey, they need to focus more on quality control. They need to focus more on these small details. They need to focus more on like optimization. They need to focus on all this other stuff. And I'm sure that there's sort of a sense of pressure right now that the developers are feeling, and I'm not surprised to hear that that might be like a bit disheartening for them, and that's totally understandable. Personally, my launch experience, my experience with the game as a whole has been overall really positive, and while I do have issues and complaints with the game and there are things that I want them to improve and stuff like that, I am far from having like a bad experience with the game. So for me overall, I've just been like soaking in all the rewards and all the free stuff that I've gotten for issues that I really haven't had to deal with. And now I didn't expect to take so long to kind of like read through through that article. I might cut out a bit of that, but I kind of want to move into like a sort of a broader discussion, and I'm probably going to keep it kind of brief. And to start things off, I want to talk about keeping things civil with the developers. And there's a reason for this. The communication between the developers and the player base has been really good thus far, and they've been very responsive to all sorts of complaints the player base has had. That being said, it is possible to burn the bridge with the developers. It is possible to be so rude or so uncivil with the way that we communicate with them that they decide to stop listening to us. So this is just sort of like a cautionary thing that I'm saying here. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm not saying that people are being rude. I'm just sort of saying that, like, I've seen in the past, developers are listening to their player base, they're taking feedback, and then all of a sudden something happens and the player base are like calling for someone's head. They're like calling for someone to be fired, demanding the developers to do what they say. And that sort of relationship is never a positive one. Just remember to be kind with your words, but not your wallet. The more money they make, the less they feel like they need to listen directly to the player base. If they're making a lot of money, they're not going to feel as much pressure to like listen to the player base and improve things with the game. Just try being polite, and if you're not having a good time with the game, stop spending money on it. I honestly believe that this is in large part what happened with Genshin and why Genshin is in such a weird place. They started making so much money, they felt like they really didn't have to listen to the player base, and the player base wasn't really making it very easy for them to listen anyway. Now, that's not an excuse for Hoyoverse. I do think lack of communication is like one of their biggest weaknesses as a company, but I just want to say that like the fault doesn't lie entirely with Hoyoverse in that situation. The next thing I want to mention is that we have no idea how long it's going to take them to implement a lot of these changes. We have no idea how quickly a lot of these things are going to get solved or how quickly some of these things will be implemented. And we don't even really know in what order these things are going to be tackled in. I'm just saying all of this to like help manage expectations a little bit, because I feel like some people are going to read this like little dev blog here and they're going to be like, oh great, everything is going to be perfect by next patch or whatever. That's definitely not what they're saying. A lot of these things are going to be work in progress kind of issues. Some of them are going to take several tries to fix. Sometimes we're going to have to give like continuous feedback. Sometimes they're going to try something and fail miserably and have to try again. We have to be patient with the development of this game. I know that like it was in development for longer than people expected it to be, and people probably expected it to be a little more polished on launch than it is. At this point, we just have to accept that the game is in the state that it's in, and we have to be patient if we like this game for it to improve. The very last thing I want to say is just that like there will be hard lines with the developers. Like, I know that some people are going to want to completely get rid of the waveform system, like the resin system essentially. People are going to want to completely get rid of that. People are going to want to completely get rid of tuners, for example. They're going to want to make it free to summon forever or whatever, right? There are going to be limits because this is a company that needs to make money, and there are just some things that they're probably just going to be completely unwilling to do. And if we keep harping on those things over and over, that's one thing that can cause them to like tune us out and just stop listening to our criticisms. So yeah, that's something to just consider while you're like writing your feedback, that maybe there are certain things that they're going to be completely unwilling to do. All right, well, this video was a lot longer than I expected it to be. I'm gonna have to cut the crap out of a lot of this and like edit it down a bunch, but it's still probably going to be a decently long video. So if you got to the end of it, I appreciate you. Thank you so much. We are at the end of the video. I just want to kind of talk about how I have this cute, small, friendly little community, and we are trying to grow. If you like Wuthering Waves, if you like video games, if you like what you saw here, if you just enjoy the sound of my voice, I don't know, I don't care. If you like, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think about like the communication so far with the developers and stuff like that. Are you impressed? Are you unimpressed? How do you feel about how they've responded to things so far in terms of like compensation and stuff like that? What do you expect from the future? How fast do you expect them to fix some of these problems? These are just like a couple ideas. You don't have to touch on all of this. Just like write what you feel like writing. Just let me know how your day is. I don't know. I don't care. Oh, we also have a friendly little Discord, and I will have the link pinned in the comment section of this video. Also, I will have the article link that I went over here in the description of the video. I would love to see some new faces in the Discord. That would be super wonderful. Feel free to join. We're very friendly in there, very chill, very cozy, very calm, very wonderful. So at the time of me recording this video, I start my new position at my new job like tomorrow. So I will be cutting down the amount of streams that I'm doing to probably like 1 or 2 a week, and I will be trying to continue with like consistent video releases. So I appreciate people that have been tuning in, subscribing, and stuff like that thus far. You're all wonderful and amazing. amazing. I'm just trying to build a friendly community. Isn't that something? All right, I'll be back soon with another video. And until then, do me a tiny little itty bitty favor and drink yourself some water.